have a really strong belief or conviction that this is how I view this particular matter, but my church or the context that I'm in really views it differently.
That there's a reason why churches either are or should be led by pastoral figures.
But how are you guys doing, Doc?
Good. It feels like things are aligning. Yeah, it really does. It just feels like I think the year has yeared. It's felt like 4 years in one, but I think without sounding super spiritual, it feels like there's been a transition. It feels like a birthing has started, for lack of a better phrase. Like things are landing, things are concluding, things are initiating. And yeah, there's like a fresh hope in the air. So yeah, I'm good.
That's dope, yo. I do want to hear how Mojo's preaching was. I'll wait for him to come back.
Well, let Elizabeth tell you. She was able to pull through. So I should give her
I'll
comment.
ask for the audience's view in a moment. I want to hear yours first. Then she can corroborate whether you called down heaven or not.
Wow. Okay. Fair enough. Honestly, that was for me. It was refreshing. It was quite, in some ways, cathartic. I don't know. It was so. Give some, not going too much detail, but just context is like, obviously it's been a while since I've done something like that. And it's the first time in a particular environment. And one of the things that I was asking time and time again is like, look, I want to honor the house. So what should I be mindful of, etc. And the pastor would keep saying, listen, and he said it multiple times. He's like, the best thing you can do is just be yourself, which I appreciated that he emphasized. And so in that, I felt very free, which was nice to just experience. Kuti, after having not done this a long time, and now you're in a new environment, what would this feel like? And so, in that regard, it's one of my by refreshing. Like, oh, okay, cool. It felt like familiar, if I can put it like that. In that, so there's that, which was really good, and of course, then still subscribing to the overall theme because it was Easter and what was asked of me. And so I think that was still met. And yeah, so overall, really great. Room to grow as always as an individual, which I'm looking forward to. Of course, Elizabeth had a word, which I appreciate as she does. So she shared that afterwards as well, which I appreciate. But yeah, all in all, a very good experience. And feedback from Usiviwe as well, who's the pastor, was also very encouraging. Yeah, that's my feedback.
Okay, Liz, do you concur? Was the
Retweet.
gospel on Easter?
No heresy detected. Yeah, no, it was
Okay.
good. No, it was also I think the phrase I used was same but different. So I think it was beautiful to see Mojo in his element, but fresh grace, and just seeing him navigate that like liminal space as he's navigating several doctrinal thoughts and ideas, but still handle it with a sense of authority, but also again, like, I don't know, there was an authenticity about like an exploration, but still bringing the word, which I thought was very refreshing. And yeah, I thought I'm excited for this next season and kind of what it holds. Yeah, so good job, Moj. He didn't bring down heaven though, but you know, it was
Thank you.
No, he was rusty. We'll forgive. Smithro, how was? Did you do service, Smithro, or did you go to church, an actual church service?
I can't remember this last week. This last week, I think we went to. Yeah.
Okay. And for Easter?
Easter we did. So Good Friday was a home service, and then Sunday we went to my daughter drives the services. She's serving, and she's right in it, which is great for her because she's at a stage where she's growing and learning so much. So I'm happy to see her. Wait, there goes my camera. I'm happy to see her at the stage, just really soaking it all in. Yeah, and it is an age where you do need your friends around you, Christian friends. So we're just happy to see that happen.
Power.
Yeah.
For us, over Easter, we were away. We went to visit some friends in Natal. And it's the first time, I think if memory serves correct, probably in the last 7 to 9 years, it's the first time we've not been like in church and in our home church over Easter. Because obviously for us, Easter's not, it's not a holiday in that sense. It's not a vacation. It's not a vacation signaling holiday. But just given the season that we're in and the season that my wife is in, not being able to take leave and stuff, we took the opportunity to take some time away, which was great. It was refreshing for us as well to be away. Yeah, but it was weird. I would be lying if I didn't say that it was weird to not be there. But things being what they are, it is what it is.
Yeah.
So we haven't caught up in a little bit. I thought it would be cool for us to chat a little bit more about this idea of doctrines. Let me tell you a little bit about what spurred this decision. There's a book that I've been reading and I will be referring to a lot in this chat. It's called Finding the Right Hills to Die On, The Case for Theological Triage by a pastor named Gavin Ortland. That's the book. And in this book, Gavin Ortland, he's a Protestant pastor of a church, and the name just escapes me now. But he's also quite a prominent figure on YouTube and creates a lot of content around, the Protestant church, and really helps Christians and non-believers, I suppose, hear the case for Protestantism, amongst other things. He also commentates on debates and, shares the gospel and does some apologetics work as well. I can't remember now the name of his channel. I want to say it's Seeking Truth, but I can't remember. Don't quote me. Anyway, so I've been reading this book, and it came at a really interesting time because it was also at a time where, for me, I have been wrestling a lot with doctrinal views that, for me, are changing, at least as this journey of discipleship goes and my seeking goes and gets deeper, and I continue to lean in and study, then views that I held previously or had not taken the time to really think about in relation to certain doctrines are coming to the fore, and I'm wrestling with a lot of them, and some of them come into tension with some of the views of my local church. And so I've been wrestling a lot with some of those things and, not knowing what to do. Does it mean I need to leave my church? Does it, you know what I mean? All those sorts of things. And so this book then came to my attention. It was definitely God's providence. And in it, I'm still reading it. I'm maybe a third of the way in. And in it, Gavin is presenting a framework, at least he's proposing a framework by which we can rationalize doctrines within the church, doctrines held and believed and understood within the church, and what to do when those tensions arise. I put some slides together which I'll share just to help guide us through it. But maybe a good way for us to begin is to maybe just go around the table. I'm keen on hearing if you guys have experienced that. I imagine you have, but that sense of tension when a doctrinal view you have shifts or changes, and now you're in a space where the people around you see things differently from how you see them, and how you've navigated it. Maybe that's a good way for us to just get started. In no particular order, which, I mean, you know what that means, Liz.
Sure. What a question to start us off, man. Well, thank you. I think for setting the context and sharing where you're at. And I think, yeah, definitely. I think the past, I don't know, maybe 2 to 5 years have been that exactly, where realizing that there are emerging realizations and new questions I'm asking, and the space that I'm in seems to hold either no space to ask those questions and wrestle, or make it very clear what their stance is, leaving no room for dialogue still, and having to figure out how to still, one, show up in a way that is honoring, and continue to hold whatever I hold faithfully, but then secondly, trying to really nurture this new spurring exploration and trying to find spaces that make room to continue to learn, to continue to wrestle, and then obviously seeking the Holy Spirit. But it often is very unsettling, I'm not going to lie, especially when it's directly connected to actions, behaviors, ongoing rituals, and I'm not sure how to proceed. Do I continue doing this particular thing? One such example is tithing and rereading it and re-understanding it. And it's like, okay, here and now, what do I do with this information? And not wanting to be one who then stirs it up in others as if to start a coup within the church or within cell groups, but needing a space to then really wrestle. And as human nature would have it, I think we have a proclivity to swing towards the other side of the pendulum. So then becoming, or trying hard not to become, then completely pro this new belief, new revelation, new understanding, new doctrine, in such a way that it undermines what I've believed thus far. And that, for me particularly, is where the tension lies. Because I think sometimes truth is energizing in that way, where you can't help but share from the excitement and the overflow of revelation. Yeah, so that's where I found myself. And I'm grateful for spaces like this, because they've definitely been helpful in bringing up these questions. Be like, am I crazy? And then wrestle. But I think the hardest part really is the lived part of it. Like, how do I proceed now? So when I go to church, knowing what I know now, do I continue? Do I stop? Do I talk to someone about this? Like, what do I do with that? And that, I think, has been the challenge, and continues to be a challenge in truth. So that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah, the more everyone talks, the more sensitive I feel. It's like it's such a pertinent subject. There's so much to say on this matter. I think, number one, depending on who you are in the organizational context in the church, depends on how vocal you can be and what moves you can make. So it's one thing if you're Mamfundisi to say, you know, something huge from the pulpit. It's another, and it's a completely other thing to be, you know, just a cell group member or whatever. And, you know, you're just processing these things. So I think that is something that needs to be taken into consideration for other people's sake. Yeah. And I guess also the severity of the doctrinal difference also comes into it. I suppose you know. Okay, I can't do this anymore. I just can't. I'm almost flatlining here. For me, one of the I mean, I've been in a situation where as a leader, I felt like, what do I do? Do I leave the sheep? And you know, something that I feel like is, you know, we need to go in a different direction, or do you kind of like just pack up quietly and go? And that is a big one for me, because it's who is your responsibility to, you know, to men or to God. And I'm not saying I have the answers for that, but I do think that the way church is set up today, there's a big element of the fear of man that plays a role in what we do. And you know, you don't want to be the guy who just well, I thought this was the way to go, so my way or the highway, and I'm bringing everybody along with me. I mean, we know we all hold these things sensitively, but just more and more the fear of God, man, the fear of God, and is one willing to be seen as the person who everybody pointed their fingers at and was the subject of sermon topics, when there's something big enough to take a stand and to speak conviction. Yeah, don't have the answers, but it's a great thing to to talk about. So the weight of leadership. Yeah.
I think that's a key thing you raise in there about the role, I suppose, that you find yourself in when you're in the church context, because you're right, it can become quite a difficult thing to navigate. Like for myself, something that I found helpful in my faith journey, it's a few years ago when, like in college, when talking about worldviews and things like that, they kind of gave like 3 categories of how, you know, one can consider things, and that's a framework I've tried to apply, so to speak. And I'm using the wrong terminology and all that, it's, you know, just forgive me. But in effect, they would, you know, say, talk about dogma and then doctrine and then preference. In effect, saying, you know, category 1 is a non-negotiable. It's just like if these things are, there's a disagreement in it. It's just basically, are we even following the same kind of faith? You know, and the doctrine, I suppose, is maybe one step below that, where it's not as severe, so to speak. It's important. But then the third category is a recognition that it's a preference, like whether you choose to do it like this, like that. It's kind of neither here nor there. And I found that quite helpful for me to consider, like, where if I had to put what I'm navigating, what I'm experiencing, in which one of these trenches, so to speak, does it fall in? And so it's been helpful in that regard. Of course, it's not to say that everything can be neatly categorized, but just as an overall framework, it's certainly been there. But yeah, then you find instances where it's just like, listen, I'm navigating a situation where I'm like, I have a really strong belief or conviction that this is how I view this particular matter, but my church or the context that I'm in really views it differently. And similar to you, Mandla, I'm just like, it's like, 'cause I'm in I guess a senior leadership position in this particular scenario, and like, okay, how do I navigate this in this particular context? That definitely is a real thing, because now, at least things that I would navigate is that if I'm completely vocal and honest about my perspective on it, is it going to introduce quote unquote division, in this context, and in that, you know do I want to be that guy? But as you said, submitting to God more than man. It's genuinely a real thing, and navigating that has certainly been interesting. And I think it's important then for all of us to understand, why do I believe what I believe right now, and of course have a sense of humility with whatever belief you have right now, allowing the Holy Spirit to speak into that, and in doing so, there's a potential that it could grow, right, and develop beyond what you understand now. But then at that point, as however it develops, you're able to look back and see, okay, how has my belief on this grown? And by grown, it could mean grown deeper, or it could have changed. I don't know. But point is, I need to understand why I believe what I believe now, and be able to give an account, or substantiate why, and stand on that. But I think a blind sense of like, as you've said, following because this is what I'm being told to do. I don't know about that. Yeah.
Yo, there's so much, guys. I
There's
knew,
so
I
much,
knew,
man.
I knew there was a lot, but there's a lot. Okay, so can I just take a stab at responding to what each of you said, like what came to mind for me. Liz, when you were speaking, I was thinking to myself, man, I wish we had recorded season 1 of these chats that all of us used to have. You'll remember, Mojo, Liz, how we'd meet at that coffee shop, and sit, and I guess a lot of the chats were on specific areas of doctrine, right? So every time it was like, here's a piece that I'm struggling with, and we'd figure that out. But hopefully we'll get to do that here, on not today, but here on the platform now. But that was the first thing I was like, yo, season 1 was so good. Then Smindlo, I was thinking when you were talking about what impact it can have. So I take your point about, the position that you hold is important to consider. Actually, it was both when you and Mojo were talking. How important the position you hold, how the implication of being in this space, and what it means, one, and also the privilege you have, depending on where you are, of being in a position where you can raise those things, is the one thing I wanted to just tag on to that is. And I think the bigger point I want to just throw in the air is what it means when the church structural, not universal, the structural church, doesn't make wrestling something that's easy to do in a way that allows you to bring it to that space. either because doctrinal wrestling, I don't know, can come across as disloyalty quite often. It sometimes feels that way, or just because, there just isn't an opportunity to question, navigate, ask, that sort of thing. And what the implication is on the, to your analogy, Mandla, the connect group attender who is doesn't have access that way. So access, I guess, is kind of what I'm talking about, and what the implications are about how well or poorly we create access for people to wrestle in a way where we can co-think, mull, learn, that sort of thing. And I guess it kind of speaks to your point as well, the Moj. That's what came up for me.
You know what it makes me think? That there's a reason why churches are either are or should be led by pastoral figures, and I'll tell you why. So while I was leading a church, I had a team of leaders that some of their views were wildly divergent, and it just it wasn't fun engaging. The letters on Monday after something's happened that this group isn't happy, and then the next group isn't happy. But to be able to hold the different groups' intention in one place, something beautiful grows out of that. And if somehow you are able to keep those groups in the same context, even though they're not fully happy with what happens in the week or on a Sunday, I think in a way you're winning as a body, because I just think that if God holds all these things, all these churches, all these spaces in tension, and somehow not everybody has it all together, but somehow it all contributes to the whole, we kind of need to, in a way, do that ourselves, at least attempt to. I mean, there's a reason that we have our specific bents, and the Lord speaks to us in certain ways. But I do think it's worthwhile making that attempt in a smaller context, in the local church expression. And I think everybody's richer for it if you can if you can maintain relationship in that context. And I mean, even that there it's not a flat rule. But I do think that way. We were certainly richer for having everybody's input. And when I think about it now, having gone past that season, I'm a lot more open and not as aggressive as I was in terms of my views on certain things. And I suppose I can afford to be now because I'm I'm sitting in the back row at the service. Awesome.
The freedom of professional congregantism.
Yeah, but I mean, it was a struggle getting back into organized church context. I tell you, you struggle.
Yeah, you do. I was gonna say, yeah, no, I love what you're saying about that holding tension for diversity and the richness it produces. And I think it wouldn't be an episode of this particular podcast if we don't come back to the usness of things. And I think a big barrier to the openness to diversity that we often don't want to be honest about is fear, not just of man, but of being wrong, of what an opposing view might produce in us, and then what am I supposed to do with that now? So I think it's a real driver of how we hold those tensions. But I think a necessary part of our walking, because I think that's where spiritual formation happens, when you're able to relook at what was once true through the eyes of spiritual maturity, a new experience, like experiencing a new part of God's heart or the church, whatever it might be, should always reinvite us to open up what we believe to be true, and just search again, rather than pursuing this like a rival perspective when it comes to the things of God. And then the other thing I was going to say, which would also be true to me, is as we're speaking, I also think of season 1 and repeated conversations about a particular American pastor who built a very, very big church that is thriving, continues to thrive, and then left to pursue what I guess could be deemed the opposite of building a mega church, to explore that maybe perhaps small church is where it's at. And if you're a follower of such leaders, like, now what? Like, so which is it? Is it your old revelation? Is it your new revelation? What if you were just wrong? So I can imagine for many that can cause a lot of tension, because they look to leadership in that way. And as you were speaking, Mandla, and even Mojo, yeah, just really thinking about, man, what a privilege it is to wrestle in private, because as you swing back and forth and are disorganized in your beliefs and the expression thereof, at most, the people implicated are those in direct proximity. And I was even just thinking about, like, from a family perspective, what that might mean for raising kids who are questioning and trying to establish their own identity in the faith, and who God is and who God isn't, and what's mandatory and what's not, and how it is then important to how you navigate that transition, I guess, becomes important. But how much more so when a whole flock is indeed then following, and how do you stay authentic while wrestling? How do you like, which word do you preach? The one in formation or the one that once was? Does it help to leave them with, and to burden with just questions and no answers? Is that indeed then maybe the role of a shepherd? Yeah, it just brings up so much around perhaps how we do it or how we've been doing it, and perhaps even just the sole perspective that indeed you must be leading to a specific direction might in and of itself be problematic, as it maybe is the blocker to teaching people how to then seek, and teaching people how to explore. But I can't imagine leading knowing that you're leading people somewhere, but even you don't know where that is, and the tension that arises from that. So yeah, complex, but intriguing.
It reminds me. Sorry, Moj. Just before you go, I've been, I've been in church spaces where I've heard church leaders that I revere talk about their view about that American pastor you're speaking of who left. And so I've heard people who are like, how noble for him to have found this thing and have discovered this and to be going on this journey. But I've also heard church leaders that I know who are like, what's this guy doing? This guy, I mean, not in that language, but that's what I took from it. Where they're like, this guy, the Lord is doing this thing, and he's like spitting on the work that the Lord is doing in his church, and yeah, people who are not so in favor. Sorry, Moj, I took it. Go for it.
No, it's so good. I mean, even from what you're saying, it my take is, well, it obviously comes down to a particular worldview you hold, and so, it is what it is. To just build on what's been said as well, like, even just formation, like what Liz was touching on, formation is a process, right? And in it being a process, it must be understood, at least it's a given in my mind, that, that there will be questions that arise for that individual as they go on a particular journey. And questions, I think, depending on the kind of individual that you are, some people see questions as a bad thing, because I've been in spaces where, even though it is said that, we welcome questions, it can be, it feels like when a question is asked, then you are betraying the particular space in having a question, which is just like, but I'm seeking clarity on a real thing that is unfolding at this present point. And I would like to think that I would rather have somebody question something in my presence, that I can have the opportunity to speak into it, than not. Because if a question's going to arise, they're going to find answers somewhere. So if they're going to go find it elsewhere without me knowing about it, it's not to say that the question isn't being asked. It's just that you're not privy to it, right? And so why not
Yeah.
create the kind of environment that welcomes a seeking, and do what you can to speak into that process. In the same breath, like, I think what can happen, and what I've also been exposed to and experienced, is that this idea that to question, and it being a sense of betrayal, it comes across as if, like, I'm not allowed to be anything other than a particular thing. And so, and it can also be packaged in the sense of, we are united if we think in the same way. But it's just like unity and uniformity are completely different things. And and understanding that the difference is key. So I think, how I interpret it, is that we oftentimes look, leadership isn't easy for different reasons. And Mandla's already spoken about some of why that can be the case. And recognizing that, look, we need help from the Holy Spirit, God, all that sort of stuff. But I think that oftentimes, maybe when you're in a leadership position, you are unsure how to navigate those difficulties, and so it's easier to require uniformity, or a fitting into particular parameters, and anything that falls outside of that, or that challenges that, then is engaged with as unwelcome, as opposed to it being celebrated and encouraged, while also being humble enough to say, listen, this is a difficult thing for me to engage with you on, but let's embark on this together, of course, with God helping me in the process. So all to say is that I think formation is a process. Let's embrace it. Let's be honest about it. It's not an easy thing to do. I love questions. I think questions give us the opportunity to go where we can go and develop and grow, but not being afforded the opportunity to ask is, I don't think it's right.
Yeah, I think scale becomes important, Moj. What you're saying is, um, there's nothing I disagree with there. Perhaps to be another advocate, or an advocate for another view, um, scale is something worth taking cognizance of, right? So, I think a lot of what you're saying sounds like it makes sense. Where in Mandla's house, when they're doing service and there's 8 of them, and we can do question and answer, or you can ask because you can manage those numbers. It becomes a different animal when there are 4,000 people in a service, in each service who come, or 10,000 people a week, or 60,000 people across 9 campuses, every week. And what we do now, if now everyone must just question everything. So there's that. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying the scale of it means something. And maybe just so we can get to this book, the other thing which I think is worth taking cognizance of is, what does this mean when we look at it at scale as the church universal? So how do we as the church universal deal with doctrinal differences that we have in a way that creates a healthy church body. Because it is one thing when I am struggling with something. It is one thing when I'm one of 1,000 people in a church struggling with something. It is another thing when there are however many billion Christians who need to now figure out this whole church Christian thing and what we do. I'm going to share my screen. I hope it works. Let's see. Because in his book, Gavin talks about a model for performing what he calls doctrinal triage, where his position is one of the important things to understand at the beginning is that, you know, all doctrines are not equal, right? And so a good approach is to perform doctrinal triage, where we rank doctrines or categorize them in a hierarchical or ranked order as a starting point. And I want to share that with you guys. I'm going to share my entire screen. Then I'm going to move. Do you see the slide in front of you?
Yes.
Sweet. Cool. So the first thing is, so he says, so his position is that, you know, let's rank. There are 4 ways that we can rank these doctrines, right, into these buckets. And it says the first rank doctrines are those that are essential to the gospel itself, right? So the idea that if you're going to call yourself a Christian, you're going to have to hold to these essential doctrines. Otherwise, we're not even talking about Christianity at this point. Then he says, second rank doctrines are those doctrines that are urgent for the health and the practice of the church. Third rank doctrines then are important to Christian theology, but not enough to justify separation or division among Christians. And then fourth rank doctrines are those doctrines that are unimportant to our gospel witness. So here in this view, we see he's positing kind of not too dissimilar to what you were suggesting, Moj, the idea of, what was it that you said? Dogma?
Dogma, doctrine, and
Doctrine
preference.
preference, yeah. I suppose there's a fourth one there, whether this is preference or whatever is sub to preference. What are your thoughts on this? Does it make sense to everyone? Do you guys agree with that? I want to see if I can find where there's something he says about the second rank doctrines, but obviously it's clear that 2 and 3 is where a lot of the argy-bargy starts to happen, right? So in the second rank one, he says, they're urgent for the health and practice of the church, such that they frequently cause Christians to separate at the level of local church, denomination, and or ministry. So I wanted to make sure I caught that piece as well. So he's saying here at level 2s, where a lot of people are now, where it's causing a lot of division and people are making decisions of where they go. But I would say even sometimes people would elevate what, at least in his position, are third rank doctrines to that point. What do you guys think?
Yeah, no, on the money. I've heard a few different kind of theologians posit variations of the same thinking, and I'm always curious to see what people put where, because that's also interesting for me. But yeah, I can, in my own experience, when I think of some of the things that have made returning officially to a house rather challenging, they probably sit in that second level, I'd imagine. They might even be third, and I'm elevating them. But yeah.
You know, it gets tricky sometimes because I love that slide that you put up. Agree totally. often issues straddle levels. So it may start as woman in leadership, say, but mixed in there is it being mandated and no discussion from the top. How do we lead in this context? Um, uh, I'm just trying to give an example of just two things that are straddling different levels, and they can get mixed up, and in the end, people you might say, they left because they weren't allowed to wear pants. But really, what it was is there was unbearable control from the powers that be. So I do think we need to be able to separate issues. Yeah.
Um, you're creating spoilers now, Mandla. I don't want to lean into what you said, but it's coming. I'm with you. I'm with you. Do you want to make a comment, Moj? Or do you want me to just keep flying?
And I think there's much that can be said. You're right. That level 2 and 3, so to speak, from the slide that you spoke, it's in looking at that. What's cool is like as a framework, that's amazing. Like it works so well. The practical outworking of that is, is what certainly is interesting. And I love how you phrased it. And you said even it's like, at least from Gavin's perspective, even just that little insertion is important because he might view certain things on level 2 but then the next person views something as that Gavin sees as a 2, they see it as a 3 and vice versa. So I think the practicalities of that become certainly very interesting. Mandana mentioned women in ministry, for example. Liz mentioned a little bit earlier about like tithing. Another one that comes to mind is literally the Holy Spirit and the gifts of the Spirit. Like, those, and some people are just like, that's not a big deal. Some are like, no, but this is a core thing of how I outwork my faith. And, so Aisha, this is good.
Okay, too many spoilers. Let me move. I'm cutting you off. Okay, so we need to get there. Okay, so the cool thing about this book, right? So I know on this view, let me be vulnerable in this space, which is safe, because safe spaces are important in this day and age. That I know I have a leaning towards drawing very hard lines about doctrinal beliefs, right? And being very, very precious about that. And Gavin talks about it, and I'll tell you what he says. And then some people have a tendency to be what he calls quite liberal in relation to how they hold doctrinal beliefs. So in this book, he starts almost as though to attack me by talking about the dangers of doctrinal sectarianism, right? So when he's writing this thing, I was like, Gavin, I'm riding with you. I'm there. Let's tell them. Let's show these guys that they mustn't play with the doctrines. And he says, okay, let's talk first about the dangers of doctrinal sectarianism. And I want to share that. I made a slide again. We live with the slides. So he makes 4 points. I want you guys to read this book, so I'm not going to ruin it for you, but he makes 4 points around doctrinal sectarianism. And he's like, so there's a danger, right, where we hold such hard lines and everything, we're so precious about everything that it creates this division in the church, right? And the first point he makes is, are all doctrines created equal? The obvious answer to that is no. So the danger with being incessantly precious about every doctrine is essentially you elevate certain doctrines to a level where they ought not to be elevated, and that creates division in the church. Remember, we're talking at a big scale, right? The church universal. Then he makes a point about how unnecessary division in the church now, it harms or unnecessary division over doctrinal views harms the unity of the church, right? And obviously we know that famous passage where Jesus is praying that his church will be united, his church will be one, just as he is one with the Father. He makes another point about how the unity of the church is essential to the mission of the church, right? Because it's difficult as a church, often because we move as one. You don't get to choose, Liz, Moj, Mandla, you don't get to choose whether or not you're affiliated to me when I'm talking to the guy or girl in the street about Christianity, right? Insofar as that discussion is concerned, we are one, one church, right? And so if in that moment I am representing all of the church, but when there is division and disunity in the church, it affects the ability of that church to work in a missional way as well. And of course, it affects the there's a word I'm looking for, the ability for the church to it affects the gospel of that church, of the church united, the church universal, sorry, because now even our message, we can't even figure out whether we are left, right, up, down, what we hold to this thing, but now we want to profess to the world, and so his views that when we're too divided in all of these things, then it's hard to even believe anything in relation to the church. And quarreling that comes as a result of that division, right, about unimportant doctrines, it harms the godliness of the church, because then what you start bickering over are things that are non-essential to our witness as a church. Witness is the word I was looking for earlier. And then you can begin, and linked to finding our identity in the gospel is when self-righteousness, because you're holding on to all of these things so hard, it can breed a self-righteousness in you that affects how godly the church can be in its mission, in its witness, in its proliferation of the gospel as well. And so he's saying, let's just not get it twisted. It's a good place for us to start by talking about what are the dangers that are inherent when we are dogmatic in how we hold every single doctrinal view that exists, which opened my eyes completely and challenged me completely about this thing. Let me hear your thoughts.
I love it. I think it's just from my side, genuinely, it's I think you guys know this. So absolute statements, I think, are problematic, isn't it? Right? It's just a principle I tend to hold. Of course, there's certain things that are a given in life, but what I'm trying to get to is that I think the more rigid you are, so to speak, as an individual, I find that it introduces complexity that you might not anticipate. And not to say that if you're completely fluid or whatever there is. So I'm subscribed to definitely to what he's saying. It's again the practical application and outworking of that which should become interesting. But yeah, I think it's important to understand the potential implications of what might happen if I am immovable in a particular particular perspective, and think about that, so to speak, before you progress. And I don't know how many of us necessarily do that. I know we're all different and stuff, but yeah, if you don't understand, like, is this really a fundamental thing? Is this a hill, so to speak, I'm willing to die on, that one should die on? If you don't understand, if you don't consider that, then yeah, I think we make oftentimes a mountain, so to speak, out of a molehill. Yeah, so I am aligned. I like what he's saying.
I want to read a quote here. And the note I wrote next to that quote was, Search my heart, O Lord. This was my note in response to the the passage. So he quotes Calvin in a passage Calvin writes, but he writes in relation to that. He says Calvin argued strenuously and at great length against the sin of schism, emphasizing that the church will always be mixed and imperfect until Judgment Day, and that much separatism comes from pride rather than holiness. I just want to throw that in there.
Ouch.
Yeah. Kick my butt. Anyway, go guys.
Yeah. I'm just thinking of, that comment on pride, man. I think 100%, 1000%. And it comes back to what I was saying earlier about like the fear of being wrong, or the other side of that, needing to be right, and how that plays into how we kind of navigate doctrine. Because if I'm not sure that what I'm saying is the one, then must I even be saying it at all? Is sometimes how it can feel. So it's either I fully believe this thing. It just doesn't feel like there's room to be like, look, maybe, just maybe. Especially when it's eternity at stake. And I think, and it weighs on me heavily, that much of the challenge that comes with witnessing to people who've been hurt by Christians and their rejection of God has to do with us, the church, and nothing to do with him. And the additional obstacle we've created. So when you allude to, that disunity and that quarreling, it doesn't depict a picture that's inviting by any means. If you are already burdened and, heavy laden by life, what you're not looking to sign up for is additional confusion, and needing to pick a side on something you don't even know what it's about yet. So I think it's such an important consideration, and I don't know what exactly the solution is, and I'm not sure you're going to give it to us, but I think it's a very important consideration. But then I also think about how weightily convictions drive people. So if you are heavily convicted by the Holy Spirit on X, Y, or Z, I can see how easily that becomes a secondary doctrinal issue for you. And yet, at least in my walk, convictions are both eternal, but the weight of them seasonal. So how, like, the primacy of an issue has often been seasonal. So in this season, God is dealing with my faith, and all I see is either faith or the absence of it in everything I hear and everything I touch and every conversation I have. And for that season, it might feel that until I get this faith thing on lock, it has to be a primary doctrine issue. And the church I'm in and the connect group I'm joining, if they're not feeling the weight of this conviction, they're off. You're not hearing the same spirit I'm hearing. So one of us is, and it can feel that weighty. So I think there's so many things that complicate this, but I think these warnings are so important, because when we take the usness out of it and we look at, again, church universal, there are still souls at stake, and we have a great commission, and how we go about that is gravely impacted by these quarrels. So power.
Let me hit you with another quote. That was deep, Liz. Let me hit you with another quote before you go, Smidlo. Now he's talking about division in the church and disunity in the church, sectarianism causing that. And he says, it's not hard to see how this can happen. The result of unnecessary doctrinal division, church splits, aloofness from how God is at work in our city, failed opportunities to link arms with other ministries, and so on. I've seen this play out. Where churches are unwilling to, seem affiliated with other churches, owing to their separatism as a result of doctrinal views. And he's talking about how it affects our mission. He says, within the body of Christ, we need each other. And we often especially need those Christians who lean in a different direction than we do. Smith, go.
Man, you opened up something else there, bro. Oh man, but I loved what you said, Liz, and it made me think. We don't want lukewarm people. You actually you want somebody who is so convinced and so strong in their beliefs around something. Because they're able to effectively rub off on the next person if they're that way, and it reminds me of he has given some to be apostles, pastors, teachers, evangelists, prophets, and I know certainly in my context when I was leading a congregation, the prophet the prophetic types were like, this is the way we must do things, and if we don't do it this way, then we're lost. And of course, the evangelist types were, they did things in a different way, and everybody was shouting for their way. And it takes. Does it then take a designated leadership figure in that context to allow the individuals to be max what they are, but to help them rub off on everybody else around them, and to then present a balanced, maybe even leaning in a particular direction for that season. I loved what you said about seasons. But should we look at a balanced or a leadership figure helping us balance our approaches so that the individuals can shine at 100%? But the importance of being in relationship, and actually, Sbu, this book that you're reading, you respect this person, and the reason that you're actually being challenged by him is you may not be in relationship with him, but you respect him, and you've allowed him into your world, and I think there's something about doing relationship, or at least surrounding ourselves with input of people that think differently to us, so that we can, even though we hold our views 100%, because of that relationship, we allow ourselves to be able to, whatever this means.
Yeah. Oh, guys. Okay, I want us to move. He says such good things about all of these things. He talks about how Paul, when he was writing to Timothy and Titus, was warning them against getting caught up in quarreling about these non-essential things and what it can mean. Warning them about getting caught up in theological debates that do not advance the godliness of those involved, but instead promote quarreling and vain speculation. I was getting cooked there. He cites Richard Baxter, who in a book, The Cure for Church Divisions, is warning that a harsh and critical spirit actually associates us with Satan. It's wild. Anyway, I want to read a prayer that he says. I want us to get to the next section. So there's a good prayer. He says there's a good prayer to pray. And he says, and the prayer goes, Lord, give me a warm corner in my heart for other Christians, especially those I am tempted to reject or despise. I know that I cannot solve all the divisions in your church, but show me what the next step might be for me personally to pursue and cultivate and honor the unity of your bride. Which, yeah, in my heart, I was shedding tears. Okay, so that's how he starts, right? So let's deal with, he says, let's deal with the dangers of going too hard in this direction, right? Of drawing hard lines and creating disunity as a result of this. Then he says, but we must also guard against doctrinal minimalism, right? Which he defines as, let me see if I can find the definition. I'm going to share my screen now. Give me a second. Let me see if I can find the definition here. You guys need to get this book, yo. Um, um,
Yeah, put it on the group, the title.
yeah, I will do. So doctrinal minimalism is the idea where people says this is the mindset that says, let's stop dividing over doctrine. It just hurts people. Let's just love Jesus and feed the poor. This is doctrinal minimalism. Um, and I'm going to share my screen again. Let me see if hopefully Liz will rejoin. I don't want her to miss it. You back, Liz?
I am sorry, I don't know what happened there.
All good. It's all good. I want to give you this definition again because we're gone. He says, this is the mindset that says, let's stop dividing over doctrine. It just hurts people. Let's just love Jesus and feed the poor. This is doctrinal minimalism. And when he talks about that, what I'm sharing are just the headings of points that he makes, right? So in relation to doctrinal minimalism, these are the main the headings that he talks about. He says non-essential. So he says a lot of, because again he's saying a lot of this happens in relation to non-essential doctrines, right? So if we hold first rank doctrines as the essential ones, where if you don't hold that, we can't actually even say you're talking about the gospel, right? So now it's the other three. And he says, one, non-essential doctrines are significant to scripture, right? Because essentially there what he's saying is the Bible tells us that all of scripture is God breathed, and is good for teaching, for rebuking, to reprove, to edify. And so if we treat non-essential doctrines as if they don't matter, then essentially what we're saying is that, and I mean, first he says the bulk of scripture actually is dealing with matters relating to non-essential doctrines. And so if we just pretend like it all doesn't matter, then we must take cognizance about what we're saying about the significance of scripture. Second, he says non-essential doctrines are significant to church history, because a lot about how the church moves and that the church can move, and the things that the church did in affecting the reality of the world in a good way is as a function of non-essential doctrines that they hold, right? So they're significant to church history. We can't pretend like they don't exist. The third one, which is now the third and fourth one, which talks to what Mandla and Mojo were talking about before I cut you guys off, is non-essential doctrines are significant to the Christian life, right? So if essential doctrines are what build faith, non-essential doctrines are what perfect our faith. So it is on the basis of non-essential doctrines that we then live out the faith that we profess. And of course, non-essential doctrines are significant to the essential ones because they find their basis in essential doctrines, which is kind of what you were talking about, Martin, when you were saying these things are linked to each other. So we can't just pretend like these things mean nothing, that if we can just throw them away, because they are undergirded and rooted in and linked to essential doctrines. And then lastly, he says, there is a time to fight over doctrine. Pause. There. Go. Somebody. Anybody.
So I'll just make a quick comment on that last one about there is a time to fight over doctrines, and just thinking about how, come back to what I said about like the level of urgency and what that is. I think for some the coming is next week. So the timing is all the time. And it's yeah. Do you know what I mean? There's so much that we don't know that makes it hard to figure out when the time is for what, when eternity is at stake, and the cost of being quote unquote wrong. And again, yeah, just the notion of minimalism, I think, of this doctrinal minimalism, I think, is where lukewarm Christianity thrives.
Yeah.
Because as long as Vela, I'm feeding the poor, I attend Easter, Christmas, and maybe one other service, and I love my neighbor, and God knows I'm trying, then I did what I could, and I'll see you in heaven. And that's not the faith that I believe we're called to. Yeah, so it is the far extreme, and I don't think it's beneficial. And indeed, it does. It undermines the holy book, because it wouldn't have been that big and thick, and rich, if it was just about that. So yeah.
Yeah, but my comment was simply going to be that to be a holder of minimal doctrine is to be extremely close to compromise. And I expect that one straddles both sides, even without knowing it. Yeah.
There are two quotes I'm going to read here. The one he wrote here: "Indifferentism about doctrine makes no heroes of the faith." Um,
Mm, mm.
and then he quotes a theologian, B.B. Warfield, who is writing, and he says, "Why make much?" He's asking the question: "Why make much of minor points of difference between those who serve the one Christ?" And the answer is because a pure gospel is worth preserving. Um, and it's about understanding like the weightiness of this thing. He goes on early on when he's speaking about non-essential doctrines being significant to church history, he makes the point that you have to recognize that historically Christians have been willing to shed their blood not only for the basic gospel message, but also for a body of doctrinal truths they have understood as important to the gospel. Consider those who gave their lives in protest of abuses within the church before and after the Reformation. So you're saying you can't just pretend like all of these things don't exist because people staked their lives and lost their lives, many of them, because of the importance of these things. Go, Moj.
No, I don't think there's much I can add to. Again, I really love how he's laid everything out. It's really good. And it's to Liz's point. My question is like, yeah, the timing. How does one actually then navigate that? Because it's important, right? It's important to know, I suppose, when not to make a big deal out of something, so to speak, or maybe not to engage. Rather, that's perhaps the better phrasing. Um, when is wiser to engage on something than the next? But that, I think, even in saying that, is that assumes that there must be a space still to engage. And I'm coming from a perspective of, I guess, in being honest, is that I still, I there's so many environments which I think don't allow for that, or maybe aren't receptive of that. That I think I recognize that that's still in me. That the sense of wanting to be like, just allow me the space at least to engage, and if we can create that, then we can navigate the when, right? But it just feels like, I think, so much of the spaces maybe don't allow for that as much. And you're right. You said it earlier, Sbu, about scalability and structures and all that sort of stuff. But I think even within that, though, is that I can appreciate practicalities needing to allow for things to happen in different ways, all that. But what happens is when practicalities now become immovable, right? They create prisons, so to speak, or museums, so that cannot be modified in any kind of way. That's I think where I'm coming from. It feels like so in what he's saying now is like there is a time to fight. It's like I agree with you. There's a time to fight because it appreciates that there is space for it, but some environments don't even allow for that space.
Yeah. And I've even heard, I've had some good discussions with people, even in relation to, the starting of the Disciplary and the Seeking Numinous podcast, almost as if to say, what you're so vociferous and feel so strongly about is not a universal thing. This is maybe an internal wrestling that you have. And perhaps you're utilizing this platform to bring us on this journey of something that's actually a wrestling inside of you. And it was very encouraging for me to find in this camp somebody else who's like, no, guy, these things are important things, and we can't pretend as if these things don't matter. I love what he says here, where he says, most of us recognize that a pugnacious, mean-spirited attitude towards theological controversy is antithetical to the gospel. But we must also say that so is an unwillingness to fight over doctrine. Doctrinal minimalism and doctrinal indifferentism have no backbone. Later on, he goes on to say, the glory of God and the good of the church are at stake, which I couldn't agree with more. He says, and then he goes on now to give a little bit of what I believe is a posture that is helpful. So next time we talk about this, I'm hoping we can dig into, the beginnings of how do we stratify certain doctrines into certain things, and how have you dealt with these things. But a helpful posture here that he says is, nothing but our deepest sincerity and diligence is sufficient for this undertaking. It'll take all the courage that we have. And I think there's a beauty in this idea of sincerity and diligence that creates a good framing for these things. That, we sincerity for me means that we're not fighting over these things for the sake of fighting, just because we love having ethereal, verbose debates about doctrinal things and get stuck into the weeds. It must be driven from a sincerity, nor are we seeking to divide the church and live with all of these divisions. There's a sincerity here about the preservation of a gospel that is pure, that I feel is what we are called to, because part of me feels like, without creating this idea of apostolic tradition or whatever, but part of me feels like it is the mantle that we all carry as disciples to preserve the purity of the gospel story that was told. And the gospel story isn't just the 4, 5, 6 things that we hold to as essential. It is the corpus of the biblical account that we're called to preserve. So but we must be sincere in that. That is our mission. But also we must be diligent in that, which tells me that almost it creates like a leave no stone unturnedness to it. Like, you have to be thorough about these things. And if you use those two things about sincerity and thoroughness, I hope that's the word, then you also hold in tension this idea that your attitude towards it needs to be dripping with the balm of unity and the desire to create unity in the church. Then those are the three things that will help then on this quest. But don't get it twisted. We are all on this quest, and this is, at least that's my view of it.
Love that. Love that. And as you're speaking, it's reminding me that part of our call is to be peacemakers, not peacekeepers. And sometimes the war is the cost of making peace. And that's even amongst ourselves. So in these wrestles, in these debates, in these heated conversations, at times that discomfort and that tension is the cost of the other side, and it is worth it. It's worth embracing the fullness, the robustness, the weightiness, the complexity of the gospel. But it is challenging, and indeed it does require courage, humility, and Jesus, lots and lots of Jesus. Yeah, no, this book is, as always, your challenges become our challenges. So thank you for letting us be cooked alongside you. I'm not sure I would pursue this kind of cooking by myself. At least not in the year that is 2025 and the way it has been going. But thank you, genuinely. I think these conversations are so edifying, so challenging, but so life giving as well. Yeah.
Yeah, well, buckle
Yeah,
up because we're in the kitchen now.
it's hot. Yeah. um, you know, talking about sincerity and thoroughness, hey? I find, at least it's been my experience, that you start talking, it starts on matters of doctrine, but then it quickly moves into matters of leadership. So when you find yourself in a position where the authorities or the powers that be are not sincere or thorough in their engagement of what is presented, now it becomes another kettle of fish, because you want to engage something, but what you're getting back is we'll do it another time, or my way or the highway, or something like that, and then people
Oh,
get
don't be
stuck.
disloyal.
Don't be disloyal. um yeah, and then we get stuck there. Then the relational dynamic becomes the central issue, and often what was the most important issue gets lost. And I feel like there's something that we need to learn about leadership and how we hold one another in an organizational, in a congregation organizational context, which makes me wonder what the role of, and then maybe this is just another discussion, what the role of a strong vision is, and how it helps and hinders what we where we go as a church. Because often what happens is that at this church, this is what we're gunning for, and the language of get the right people on the bus and the wrong people off the bus is is included in those conversations, because this is where we're going. uh, and often in that this is our vision, often that's where doctrinal issues arise, and then the question is, now, can we talk about this? And sometimes it feels like we're being led by that goal, as opposed to reaching for Christ, um,
Oh, oh.
all that I'm saying is that sometimes, yeah, that goal, that vision, disables us from being thorough and sincere.
No, I'm with you, Smiglo. And I wanna add another element because we're not getting into any of this now. But what I wanna add to that is, um, you know, this idea of grappling with doctrine is as much about creating an internal accountability mechanism for yourself, that I think sometimes churches, in their desire to put their best foot forward, want to create this perception of infallibility. And you see it in all the things, right? So those slides better come on time. Though that basket can't not go down that road, that way it needs to happen. God forbid the news segment, somebody stammers or stutters over a word, right? And we use the word excellence in a way that sometimes can be toxic, because we want to create in this perception of excellence. It creates I don't want to be absolutist. It can create an unhealthy perception of infallibility that then translates to how the leadership, to your point, presents itself, and why it is so few church leaders are willing to be open about the areas where they stuff up, or they get things wrong, or they misstep, or they misspeak, and all of that stuff, and how it can be a balm to see a church leader come onto the pulpit and say, last week, peeps, I said this thing, that's my bad, as the knee-jerk reaction. But rather, that's not what we get. The knee-jerk reaction is often the PR curated one, rather than the one that seeks to create unity. And so your point about leadership and what it means to be sincere and diligent is what are you sincere about? That if we're sincere about the gospel, and we're sincere about the unity of the church and the preservation of the purity of that gospel, that means even for us, not only do we need to be secure enough to be willing to hear when those to whom God has given us charge come to us and say, you know, that thing that you said, I feel some type of way about that. Can we chat about this thing? There's that. But then also, you in your own right, when there are areas, let's not sugarcoat them. We understand we're not perfect. Let's take the opportunity when, in a way that's appropriate, to show that, hey, do you know what? This happened. There's again a prominent American pastor, a black guy, who in recent times I've seen on more than one occasion be willing to say, you know what, the way I framed that wasn't the best way, and I see that it created some hurt. That's my bad. The way I shouldn't have used that word that I used, a word that perhaps would have been innocuous to most of us, but was willing to say, hey, you know what, that's my bad. You know, and and how do we create examples of that? Um, um, you know, just to build on what you said, just
Yeah, yeah. And you know, I think, I mean, I have heard the phrase "get the right people on, get the wrong people off" thrown around in various contexts. I mean, it's a business principle. Often we use it in the church context. And I think what can happen is that when you're so dogmatic about where you're going, you don't even think about anybody who's even close to sounding like they're disagreeing. There's no engagement there. It's just, okay, let's get them off the bus because what they're saying isn't where we're going. And I just feel like there's a danger there.
yeah. Look, I'm still reading, and in 2 weeks we'll now go into the thing, because the next time, sorry, not in 2 weeks, in two chats, because the next chat is going to be a different one. But we're going to come back here. But But let me give everybody a chance to either add further spice as if we don't have enough, or give some last musings.
Moj, did you want to go? Because I did have a question to add, but you can go for it first.
No. Look, all I was going to say is there's several cans that have been opened that need to be climbed into, and I'm all for that. And what this conversation has affirmed me in, which I'm so thankful for, is the part of me that's tends towards joining the ranks of our resident fire starter and setting certain things alight. So, thank you.
It's so funny, Moj. You caught it in the spirit because I was going to say, first of all, that bus must burn. Um, I joke, I kid. I think I'm just sitting here and I'm thinking, and I think we often do bring this component of it up, is we've spoken about scale, and I think something that's hard to avoid is also the fact that people are at different places, and I wonder, even just in the context of this doctrinal conversation, is before even determining whether it's primary, secondary, tertiary, people must know what is. And how do you teach what is without leaning to any particular side? Yeah, I don't know how you do that at scale.
I tell you what, an interesting question is, how many church leaders who lead large undertakings do you think would be willing to put at risk the scale of what they've built for the sake of moving in a direction of greater purity?
I'm sorry, was that you starting to sound like you're saying that maybe,
I'm asking a question. Minto, do you have a thought?
I, man, I don't want to go into that. Well, for me, I guess what I've been thinking about this whole time is just the importance of the Holy Spirit and relationships around us, because it's hard. You know, we talk about surfacing doctrinal challenges and being the person who thinks differently. It's so hard. The pressure that comes from people around you, but also the pressure that comes from inside of you. Man, to get to the point of, am I going to say something, and to who? It takes so much. And how we need the Holy Spirit to, number one, like, am I the seed that the Lord is using in this moment? And it might feel like a fourth tier doctrine, but am I the seed? Is the Lord using me? Must I pursue it in this way? Take it further? Or is it something that I must just, take an aspirin and and feel better? But these are such key things. I've just been struck by the importance of providing an environment for people to have these discussions and to be able to bring things forward, because they are, I mean, those slides that you put up, minimal and can't remember the terminology that we use.
Sectarianism.
Sectarianism. It's all important, and we need to be able to handle it well by the power of the Spirit.
Well, I certainly pray that the Lord, insofar as the Disciplary is a platform that creates a space where it's okay
Yeah.
to not be okay with things, that the Lord would perpetuate and proliferate and enlarge the tent of what it is we're trying to do. Because ultimately, all it is that we are is a group of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 seekers looking to build community. So I'm okay with not being okay. Um, and I certainly hope that others who are of a similar view would find this to be a space where at least we can engage, so that we can preserve what should be most pure.
Amen.
All right, shall we? You wanna cut it there? I can't not make a comment about Mojo's setting, bro. You won the podcast setting Olympics, brother. Take the gold and teach us power.
Thank you.
I don't even know if those are real books or if it's whatever it is. It's cooking.
Must I saw a I think was it a streamer, a Twitch streamer or something like that, who apparently had something in the background and he was being accused of it not being real. It was a sports car, and then he went and he started it for real. So must I reach to?
No, it's all good. I trust.
But thank you. I received.
I trust you.